Under the pale morning light, the old wooden gates of the county auction yard creaked open, and the sound of restless hooves echoed across the dirt lot. Dust curled around the legs of nervous animals as buyers gathered, their voices low, their eyes sharp. Men in worn hats leaned against rails, arms folded, scanning the line of horses tethered in waiting. Among the strong-boned stallions and glossy mares, one stood apart, a thin, patchy creature with scars crisscrossing her hide. Her ribs pressed against dull skin, and her mane hung like an uncombed thread of straw. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Instead, her head drooped low as though the weight of her past bore down on her neck. The tag clipped to her halter read 47, a meaningless number for a horse no one seemed to want. The auctioneer's voice was bright and unkind. "Next up, lot 47. A mare of questionable quality," he said, drawing a few chuckles from the crowd. "What do we say, folks? Who's feeling generous today?" No hands rose. Someone in the back whispered something that made the others laugh. The mare flinched at the sound, a slight tremor passing down her thin legs. She wasn't just unwanted. She was invisible except when she was the punchline. The auctioneer tried again, this time with mock pity. $1. Anyone? She's not good for much, but she eats like the rest. The laughter was louder now, unkind and casual. Eli Turner stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, boots caked with dust from his own worn pastures. He wasn't there to buy. He had come mostly out of habit, curiosity, or maybe loneliness. His ranch wasn't failing, but it wasn't thriving either, and Eli himself carried the look of a man who had learned to live with disappointment. Broad-shouldered but tired-eyed, he scanned the yard with the detached interest of someone who had stopped expecting surprises. But when his gaze fell on the mare, he didn't look away. There was something in the way she stood, not proud but not completely broken either. Beneath the scars and the tremors, there was still a shape of strength, a hint of something that refused to vanish. He moved closer to the railing, hands resting on the rough wood. She flicked one ear toward him, then quickly looked away, as if afraid to be noticed. Eli watched her chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. He saw the faint twitch of muscles when someone walked too close, the nervous shuffle of her feet. This was not just a neglected horse. This was a creature who had learned the world could hurt. Eli understood that language too well. The auctioneer's tone turned impatient. "Nothing. Come on, folks. A $1 and she's yours. Otherwise she'll be moved along, and we all know what that means." A man in a leather vest muttered, "Not worth the feed." Another snorted, "Couldn't pull a wagon if her life depended on it." Eli's jaw tightened. He remembered another horse years ago, a proud bay gelding that had gone down hard during a storm. He remembered the sound of hooves slipping, the weight against his shoulder, and the helplessness that followed. He'd sworn off rescues after that day. Too much heartache. Too many graves dug behind the barn. Yet here he was, staring at a mare who looked like she'd already been written off by everyone else. Something shifted inside him, a quiet, stubborn voice that said, "Not today." Before he could talk himself out of it, his hand lifted. $1, he said, his voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. The crowd turned to look at him, some grinning, some shaking their heads. "Sold," the auctioneer barked, almost relieved to move on. "To the gentleman with the boots and the good heart, I suppose." The paperwork took only minutes, but the stares lingered. Men whispered, a few amused, some bewildered. Eli ignored them. When he approached her with the lead rope, she hesitated, nostrils flaring. For a second, he thought she might bolt, but when he offered his hand, open and calm, she froze, then lowered her head just enough to let him clip the rope. Her eyes, deep and dark, met his for a fleeting moment before darting away. There was no trust there, not yet, but there was something else, curiosity maybe. Leading her toward the truck was slow work. She balked at the sound of the trailer door, muscles stiff under her skin. Eli didn't push. He waited, speaking softly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Easy now," he murmured, the kind of voice you'd use to calm a restless friend. Finally, with a cautious step, she climbed in, trembling but upright. He secured the door gently, not slamming it, and for a brief second, he let his hand rest against the cool metal as if to promise something he wasn't sure he could keep. As he climbed into his truck, the mare shifted inside, the trailer rocking slightly. The road ahead was long and dusty, leading back to a ranch that had seen better days. But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another trip home. Something about the way she'd looked at him, fear mixed with the faintest thread of defiance, stirred a part of him that hadn't woken in years. A few miles out, he caught sight of her through the small trailer window. She stood rigid but balanced, ears flicking at every bump. That's when he noticed it, a faint mark half hidden beneath her dull coat. It was the shape of a brand, worn and nearly erased, but still there. He didn't recognize it yet, but its presence was undeniable, a whisper of a history she carried with her. Eli's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, the unknown felt like possibility. The trailer rattled over the uneven gravel road, each bump drawing a shift from the mare inside. Eli kept his hands firm on the wheel, his eyes on the horizon, though his thoughts lingered on the quiet weight of the animal behind him. When he finally turned onto the narrow path leading to his ranch, the familiar creak of the gate welcomed him, though the place carried the tired look of a man who worked hard but never quite caught up. The barn stood weathered, its paint long faded. The corral was serviceable but showed years of use. Eli had stopped investing in appearances when profit margins turned thin, but the land still had life, and that mattered to him. He parked near the barn and stepped down, boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. The mare shifted again, a hollow thump echoing from the trailer walls. He moved slowly, speaking as he unlatched the door. "Easy, girl. We're home." At the word home, she tossed her head, the whites of her eyes showing briefly. The smell of new surroundings, the open air, the distant calls of birds. It was a world unfamiliar to her. She hesitated on the ramp, nostrils flaring, then took a cautious step onto the dirt. Her thin frame seemed even more fragile out here, yet there was a tension in her muscles that spoke of coiled energy rather than complete defeat. Eli led her to the small paddock near the barn, the safest place to start. The mare followed but at a distance, the lead rope taut between them. She stopped suddenly, testing the pull, her body trembling at each noise, the snap of a fence wire, the flap of a tarp. She was not just shy. She was alert in a way that suggested she had learned to anticipate harm. Eli didn't push. He stood still, letting her feel the rope slacken, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "No rush, Willow." The name slipped out before he realized he had spoken it. A name that felt soft, resilient, fitting for something that bent but didn't break. He gave her space, tying the rope loosely to a post while he filled a water trough and scattered fresh hay. She didn't rush to eat. Instead, she kept her head high, watching him, her ears flicking at every movement. The sun rose higher, warming the paddock, and for long minutes they existed in silence, two creatures circling one another's trust. Finally, with a slow and hesitant motion, she stepped toward the water, dipped her muzzle and drank. Eli didn't move, but inside something settled. She was still willing to try. Days passed, measured not by hours but by small victories. Willow stayed distant at first, retreating to the farthest corner of the paddock when he approached. But hunger softened her stance, and by the third day she was eating from the hay pile while he stood nearby. Eli spoke often, his words simple, steady, more for her comfort than his own. "You're safe here. Nobody's rushing you." The mare began to show curiosity. One morning, she extended her neck toward his outstretched hand, nostrils quivering at his scent. He didn't close the distance, he waited. When her whiskers finally brushed his fingers, he felt the tremor of her uncertainty but also a pulse of something else, willingness. He noticed things as he worked with her. Beneath the scars, her legs were clean, her joints strong. Her frame, though thin, hinted at power once restored. There was a way she carried herself when she forgot to be afraid. A lightness, a sense of balance. Stirred questions. Eli found himself studying the faint brand on her flank each evening. The shape was worn but deliberate, the curve of letters or symbols nearly erased. He didn't recognize it, but it whispered of a history not common to horses that ended up here. One night, after she had eaten, he rubbed the dirt gently from that spot. She flinched, but he kept his touch calm. "What's your story, Willow?" The following afternoon, Eli called an old acquaintance, Sam, a retired trainer who once worked with some of the best bloodlines in the county. They talked briefly, and Eli described the brand as best he could. Sam's interest sharpened. "Send me a sketch," he said. "That mark sounds familiar." Eli hung up, feeling the first tug of curiosity mix with the quiet satisfaction of progress. But Willow was still a challenge. She feared sudden movements, bolted at unfamiliar sounds, and refused the halter some mornings. Eli learned to work around it, patience becoming his tool. He approached sideways rather than straight on, kept his voice level, and let her see every gesture. Gradually, she allowed more. A brush across her withers, a lead around the paddock, the faintest pressure to guide her steps. Trust was coming, fragile but present. Then the storm came. It rolled in at dusk, sudden and violent, wind snapping branches and rain hammering the roof. The paddock gate rattled, and in a burst of panic, Willow slipped the latch. Eli heard the clang and ran, boots splashing through mud as she disappeared toward the tree line. Lightning lit her silhouette for seconds at a time, thin legs, mane flying, tail lashing. He called her name, his voice swallowed by wind. For an hour, he searched the edges of the property, rain soaking him through, heart tightening with each empty moment. Finally, near midnight, he saw movement at the far fence. Willow stood there, soaked and trembling, but she hadn't gone far. She was alone in the dark but facing the barn, as if drawn back by some thread of safety. Eli approached slowly, speaking softly, his arms low, his steps deliberate. She didn't run this time. Instead, she stood still, sides heaving, letting him slip the rope over her neck. He walked her home, not pulling, just leading, and she followed, her head low but her steps steady. Back inside the paddock, she turned once, as though to look at him, water dripping from her mane. Eli couldn't tell if it was trust or exhaustion, but the message was clear enough. She hadn't run away to escape, only to remember how to come back. A week after the storm, the ranch carried a strange calm. Morning mist clung to the fence lines, softening the edges of the world, and Willow moved through the paddock with more ease now. Her ribs less prominent, her coat beginning to show a faint, healthy sheen. Eli leaned on the rail, coffee in hand, watching her circle. Every day since that night, she had been different. Not tame but attentive, her ears flicking toward his voice, her steps hesitant yet deliberate when he approached. Something had shifted between them when she returned instead of disappearing into the wild. It was a fragile thread of trust, and Eli knew not to pull too hard. But that brand still gnawed at his thoughts. In daylight, he studied it again, brushing back the growing gloss of her coat to trace the faint lines. The shape was like a half-moon and a set of initials, worn as though time itself had tried to erase it. He sent a clearer sketch to Sam, the retired trainer, who called back the next evening. His tone sharpened with interest. "I know that mark," Sam said. "She's no backyard pony. That mare came from the Whitmore line." Eli straightened. Whitmore meant high breeding, fast horses, bloodlines with history. But Sam's voice dropped lower. "The last I heard, one of theirs broke down on the circuit. There were rumors she was pushed too hard, sold off when she couldn't earn anymore. Some say the man who owned her didn't take failure kindly." The words landed heavy. Eli looked across the paddock at Willow, her head bent over the water trough. Abuse would explain the flinches, the tremors, the fear of sudden movement. It wasn't just neglect. It was memory etched into muscle. Eli set the phone down slowly, staring at the barn wall. It angered him in a quiet, restrained way. Not a sharp burst of rage but a steady burn. She was a creature built to run. then discarded when she stumbled like a tool worn dull. The next mornings became lessons for them both. Eli introduced a halter again, this time slower, speaking gently, letting her see and smell the rope before touching it to her neck. The first time she shied, he stepped back, not forcing her. By the third day, she stood still long enough for the halter to slip over her ears. Her breathing quickened, but she didn't bolt. Eli praised her with quiet words, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and led her forward, one careful step at a time. The groundwork followed. Simple circles, short walks in the corral, learning pressure and release. She moved stiffly at first, her head high, ready to flee at any sign of restraint. But Eli's patience was a steady thing. When she tensed, he softened. When she balked, he waited. Small gains added up. A head lowered, a stride loosened, a tail less tight. Each session ended before she grew weary or fearful. With each day, more of her strength revealed itself. Beneath the scars, Willow was built for speed. Long legs, deep chest, a fluid stride that hinted at power. Once, when a jackrabbit darted across the field, she surged forward with a burst of energy so sudden it made Eli's breath catch. He tightened the lead but let her stretch for a moment, feeling the rawness of what she still carried. It wasn't gone. It was buried under caution, waiting for permission to surface. One evening, Sam drove out to see her in person. The old trainer moved with a limp, but his eye for horses was sharp as ever. He stood at the fence, arms folded, watching Eli work the mare at a slow trot. "She's got more in her than I expected," Sam said finally. "But she's nervous, quick to doubt herself." Eli nodded. "She's had reason." Sam glanced at him. "You think she's done?" Eli looked at Willow, her ears tuned back to his voice, her steps aligning with his pace. "I think she's just getting started." Sam studied the brand again, his fingers brushing it. "If she's Whitmore stock, she was trained hard. Maybe too hard. It'll take time to replace bad memories with good ones. But if you keep at it, she could surprise you." That night, Eli sat on the barn steps long after chores were done, watching Willow in the dim yard light. She grazed quietly, tail flicking, occasionally lifting her head to scan the dark. The ranch felt different now, as though it had taken a breath it hadn't drawn in years. He thought of the dollar he had spent, the jokes at the auction, and how none of them saw what he saw now. The weeks ahead brought tests. A new sound, a feed bucket dropped too quickly, sent her skittering. A passing truck's engine growl made her throw her head, whites showing. Each time, Eli steadied her, talking low, guiding her back to calm. He learned her triggers. The sharp click of metal, the quick shadow across the ground, the feel of weight behind her. But he also learned her moments of courage. The way she stood when a windstorm rattled the barn, or how she would stretch her muzzle toward his coat pocket, searching for the apple slices he sometimes carried. Slowly the idea formed, not of racing, not yet, but of running. She needed to feel freedom with guidance, to remember what her body could do. Eli built it into her days, short canters around the larger field, no saddle, no weight, just the rhythm of hooves on soft earth. The first time she broke into a gallop, something inside her seemed to wake. Dust rose behind her as she stretched out, mane flying, a blur of muscle and will. Eli watched, standing still, the image etched deep. The unwanted mare, the one sold for $1, running like she owned the ground beneath her. When she slowed, sweat darkened her coat, but her head was high, ears forward. She didn't look like the same animal anymore. And though no one else was there to see it, Eli smiled. Not a quick grin, but a slow, knowing one. She was still healing, still learning, but there was no question now. She hadn't been finished, only forgotten. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Eli led her back to the barn. The light turned the dust gold, and the world seemed suspended for a moment. At the gate, Willow paused, her body angled toward the open field. Eli felt the pull of her gaze and said softly, "Soon." The morning of the county fair arrived with a thin veil of fog clinging to the hills. Eli woke before dawn, restless, his boots thudding softly on the old wooden floor as he gathered gear that hadn't been touched in years. He moved with a quiet focus, as though afraid that any hesitation might unravel the fragile progress they had made. Willow stood in the paddock, her coat now a smooth chestnut glow beneath the early light, muscles more defined. Her posture no longer timid but curious. She watched him approach with ears pricked, stepping toward the gate instead of away. There was no halter in her eyes now, only recognition. Eli stroked her neck before slipping the lead rope on, the gesture practiced and calm. "It's just a ride," he murmured, though even he knew it meant more. The fair was no grand stage, but it was a gathering of eyes, the same kind of eyes that had watched her sell for $1 weeks before. He loaded her into the trailer with deliberate care, each latch checked twice, the drive to town slower than usual. Along the road, the world seemed both familiar and new. Fields rolling past, barns leaning against time, and the quiet hum of something like anticipation in his chest. The fairground was alive with noise and color. Children ran between pens, the scent of hay and fried food thick in the air, banners snapping in the breeze. Eli pulled into the smaller lot behind the barns, away from the bustle, but it didn't take long for familiar faces to notice him. Men he'd seen at the auction strolled by, their grins knowing. "There's the hero of the Mare," one called, half amusement, half curiosity. Eli said nothing, only checked Willow's legs, adjusted her halter, and let her see the world beyond the trailer. She was tense but not frightened, her eyes wide, her steps measured as she took in the chaos of the fair. The event was modest. An exhibition run, barrel patterns, simple time trials meant more for community pride than professional glory. But to Eli it was a test, not of speed but of trust. He wanted to see if the bond they had forged could hold steady under pressure. In the practice ring, Willow moved uncertainly at first, stiff through the shoulders, but each word from him softened her. He kept his hands light, his cues gentle, guiding rather than demanding. Spectators gathered along the fence, murmuring, some remembering the mare's sunken frame at the auction. A few shook their heads as if to say this would be short-lived. When their turn came, Eli swung into the saddle with quiet efficiency, not showmanship. Willow shifted under him, feeling the weight, but she did not tense as before. The gate opened, and the pattern waited. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. He could hear her breathing, feel the coil of muscle beneath him, the readiness balanced on the edge of memory and instinct. Then he asked her forward, not with force but with trust. Willow moved. At first cautious, then quicker, her stride lengthening, her ears flicking to his voice. They approached the first barrel, her hesitation brief but conquered by his calm hands. Around they went, turning tighter than he expected, then driving to the next, the ground kicking up behind them. The crowd's noise faded. All he heard was rhythm, the thud of hooves, the steady exhale of the mare rediscovering herself. At the last turn she stumbled slightly, a flash of old fear, but Eli's weight shifted, his voice low and firm, and she recovered with a surge. They crossed the line not in perfect form, not the fastest by any measure, but without breaking, without quitting. Silence came first, then a swell of applause. It wasn't for a record or a prize. It was for something harder to measure. Eli slowed her to a walk, hand on her neck, feeling the tremor of exertion, the pulse of life returning to something many had dismissed. As they left the ring, a few faces were softer, less amused. One older man tipped his hat. "Didn't think she had that in her," he said. Eli only smiled faintly. "She always did." Later, back at the trailer, Eli gave her a drink, an apple sliced clean, the juice dripping on his fingers. She chewed calmly, eyes half closed. No sign of the nervous creature from weeks before. Sam found them there, leaning on the fender, a grin tugging at his mouth. "She's got heart," he said. "That's not something you can train." Eli nodded. She just needed someone to see it. As the sun dipped, the fairground thinned, and Eli drove home with a trailer not of weight but of quiet triumph. Willow stood steady inside, shifting now and then, but no panic, no wide eyes. When they reached the ranch, the air was cool and still. Eli opened the trailer, and she stepped down smoothly, ears turning toward the sounds of home. He walked her to the pasture gate, unhooked the lead, and for a moment they both stood there, looking out over the open field. She moved first, trotting forward, then breaking into a gallop, her mane streaming like a flag of victory. Around the pasture she flew, strong now, tail high, each stride sure. Eli leaned on the gate, watching, his chest full but quiet. This was not the end of their work, not even close, but it was enough. Enough to know that second chances were worth the risk. When she finally slowed, she came back to him, walking this time, head lowering as if in thanks. He rubbed the star on her forehead, fingers gentle. "You were never broken," he said softly. "Just waiting for the right road." Inside the barn, the tools of an ordinary ranch waited, the smell of hay and leather warm. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the place seemed alive again, as though a tired heart had learned to beat stronger. For anyone watching, it was only a man and a horse. But for Eli, and for the thin, scarred mare who had been sold for $1, it was proof that value isn't found in a price tag, but in the courage to believe. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.